Dennis? All right, thanks, man. Hello. Hello, welcome. Firstly, a little housekeeping. Please turn your phones, do not disturb, silent, etc. That would be great. And welcome. Welcome, everyone, to another in Newton for Everyone's series of educational events. Thank you all so much for coming, both here and on the Zoom. We're particularly grateful to see some of our elected officials in the room. We have State Rep Amy Massangiolo and City Council President Mark Laredo, of people who I have seen. My apologies if I missed you. In case you're not familiar with us here at Newton for Everyone, we are a pro-housing organization. We're advocating for diverse housing opportunities for people of all ages, means, backgrounds, and abilities to be able to live here in Newton. And we believe that the housing crisis affects all of us in ways large and small, from the global scale of worsening the impacts of climate change to the character and vibrancy of our village centers. But the most concrete implication of the shortage of housing, I think, is in affordability. Newton has long prided itself on being an inclusive city that is home to residents from all walks of life. But unfortunately, it has largely moved out of reach to all but the most prosperous members of society. Fortunately, the turnout at this event, both from our elected officials and also from ordinary citizens, indicates that changing this dynamic is important to Newton. And fortunately, we're going to hear tonight about what we can do to build a more affordable, diverse, and vibrant city. The issue of affordability recently became very real for me. My daughter's best friend at Horseman Elementary recently lost her housing situation and for a time was in danger of being homeless. As my wife and I tried to help this family find a place to live in Newton or a neighboring town, we saw up close how challenging and indeed scary it can be to suddenly not have a home that you can afford in your community. And as I watched these two little girls play, I could not, I'm sorry, I still have trouble stopping thinking about the fact that my daughter does not deserve a secure home and the opportunities afforded at Horseman and in our wonderful school system here in Newton. She does not deserve that any more than any other 5-year-old kid. They deserve it the same. And it's not fair that one of these kids has no concerns about membership in our community and access to those things just because her parents have more money. I am heartened that we have so many of you here tonight to hear about how we can work to expand access to affordable housing in Newton to prevent and address situations like these. Fortunately, we have the perfect guests here with us tonight to discuss this. We have Newton native and current resident Jason Korb here. He has been building 100% affordable housing for almost 20 years. He's worked all over the Commonwealth, from Bridgewater, Brockton, Cambridge, Easton, Haverhill, Sharon, Springfield, and Templeton. Jason is a trustee of the Newton Affordable Housing Trust and on the board of CHAPA. And when people think about affordable housing, they or you might be imagining a drab apartment tower of the sort that was built in the 60s and 70s. But as I hope you'll see tonight, Jason builds the opposite of those kinds of buildings. He builds attractive buildings that enhance the visual interest of a neighborhood, and more importantly, house new residents who are able to make that community more diverse, more vibrant, and who we would be proud to have here with us in Newton. Tonight we'll start with a presentation from Jason about some of the challenges preventing the construction of affordable housing here in Newton, and then we'll move on to some potential solutions to those problems. At the end, we'll open things up to questions from the audience. But before we get to Jason, we have a special guest speaker who wanted to say a few words. Congressman Auchincloss, please go ahead. If we can hear you on the Zoom, which you are joining from Washington, D.C.
Good evening. Could you give me permission to turn on my video as well?
Yes.
There I am. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for giving me the floor. I saw this event and just could not resist an opportunity to thank you for your advocacy and your work. I cannot see all your faces out there, but I know how many friends and colleagues there are in the room. And I can tell you how much I genuinely admire and appreciate the work that you are doing. In my view, housing and the cost of housing is the #1 economic challenge facing Massachusetts. I represent 35 cities and towns, and I am able to speak with young Bay Staters starting families here, mid-career people working in downtown Boston or in Providence, Rhode Island, and commuting from south of my district. And I talk to senior citizens. All of them are feeling the burden of 40, 50, 60% of their share of wallet going to either rent or mortgage payments. It's suffocating our economy here in the Bay State, and it's depriving people of the opportunity of retirement security and of the ability to allow opportunities to unfold in their lives and to make the most of their career along with their family. We have to address this. The work that you're doing is critical for it. I'm trying to pick up an oar and row with you here in Congress. I've been a co-lead of 2 pieces of important affordable housing legislation last Congress. One was the Yes in My Backyard Act, which required recipients of community development block grant funding to explain how they were going to relax land use restrictions to build more housing, particularly that critical element of missing middle housing, those 2 to 20 unit complexes that create gentle density and so much infill supply of housing in areas that need it. And secondly, the People Over Parking Act. Some of my former city council colleagues will recollect how stridently opposed to parking minimums I am, as they really are cross subsidies away from housing that we need. And I've co-sponsored legislation that would try to ease out parking minimums in areas around federal infrastructure. And also throughout my district, I have been clear that compliance with the MBTA Communities Act, which is a good law and is a law that should be upheld across Massachusetts, is a precondition for any community-directed funding that I allocate from my office. We need to build more housing. We need to build more market rate housing. We need to build more affordable housing. We need more supply. And the work that you're doing helps us get closer to that goal. Thank you. And I look forward to continuing to be a champion for affordable housing in the 119th Congress.
Thank you, Congressman, also for hanging with these technical difficulties. But without further ado, here's Jason with his presentation.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Josh, who I went to kindergarten with, who invited me today. I do want to mention a few people. I know a lot of you in the room, but my fiance Eva is here, my colleague William, my business partner Matt, my friend from 2nd grade Jason is here, and then my ex-wife and her great husband are in the back with the kids for a few minutes, and then they're going to leave because they have to go to school tomorrow. But thank you for having me. And I saw Councilor Farrell walked in as well. I just wanted to acknowledge his presence too. So my background, well, this is where it all started. This is sixth grade in Zervis. And I'm up in the upper right-hand corner with the bowl haircut. Jason is right in front of me. standing right over here. As was mentioned, I grew up in Newton. I grew up on Helene Road in the Zervis area, went through Newton Public Schools, and a lot of people ask me, well, how did you get into this business? And it's weird because affordable housing is what people are talking about right now. And I kind of fell into it when I went to Michigan. My senior year, I took a class called Urban Redevelopment. It was taught by Professor James Chafers, and he was a professor of architecture, and I was also an Afro-American studies major. I heard this class was going to be amazing, so I go into the class, and he was this short gentleman with a very strong presence. In the first day of class, he put up on the screen a slide of a burnt-out building in downtown Detroit. And he asked the class, what do you see? And a person said, I see despair, I see hopelessness, I see a burnt-out building. And he's standing there shaking his head, and I was too scared to say anything at that point. And he said, let me tell you what I see. I see a community center. I see affordable housing. I see hope. We weren't actually even allowed to use the word problem in class. We could only talk about opportunities. And you know when you have these moments in your life that are like these pivotal moments that change the course of what you do? That was my pivotal moment in life. It was like that one moment where he put these slides up. He didn't have a projector like this. He had those transparent, you know, I forgot what they were called now, right? Yeah. And that one moment changed my life. Before I took that class, I was gonna go off to the Rockies and ski and hang out with goats, and then everything kind of just changed for me. And I fell in love with cities, and I fell in love with urban redevelopment. And I fell in love with what are the possibilities. You know, a vacant building to me is affordable housing. It's what are the things that we can do to add value to our community, and how can we build community? And so when I graduated, I started off as a community organizer at Fenway Community Development Corporation. I did housing development for them. So I'm very entrenched. I was very entrenched in the nonprofit world, and still am. We have a project we're working on right now with a local nonprofit in Springfield. I went on to work at Beacon Communities, which is one of the largest developers of affordable housing on the East Coast, now across the country. And then in 2010, I started up my own company. Didn't have children at the time, and realized if I was going to go off on my own, that was going to be the time. And you know, there's certainly been struggles, but I don't regret one moment of it. So we always say, and Matt and William and I always kind of say to ourselves, and we say to the public, we never will build anything that we ourselves won't live in. That's our standard, right? Whether it's market rate housing that we do on the side, or whether it's affordable housing, it has to meet that standard. And so I thought I'd take you through a few of the projects that I've worked on since I left Beacon, and then that will be the fun part of the presentation, and then we can get into some of the nuts and bolts and more of, oh, okay. We're good? Okay. So, you know, pictures tell 1,000 words, right? So I thought I'd take you through some of the projects that I've done over the last 14 years since I started my company. And then we can talk about kind of the details of affordable housing. I was a member of the Affordable Housing Trust. I recently had to resign. I'm overly committed. That's the only reason. But I am here as one of you. I'm a citizen. I don't have any plans to develop in Newton, although I get asked to a decent amount. We have a very robust pipeline that spans many, many years into the future. So although I am an affordable housing developer and I am a developer, I just want you to know I don't have any agenda here. My agenda is just to see, as a member of our community, how we can promote building affordable housing. So that's why I'm here. This is a project this is my first project I did in Brockton. It was Brockton's first brick shoe factory, and if you know the history of the shoe industry in Massachusetts and the country, Haverhill, Brockton were all shoe manufacturing cities. And you can see, when I bought the building, I actually thought it was a brown brick building, but it turns out it was a red brick building. Can everybody see the slides? The images are really important, so I'm gonna duck a little bit. This is what the inside looked like on the right. And then you can see on the left, we used federal and state historic tax credits. And the floor that you see on the right is actually, when you clean it and refinish it, this is what you end up with, which is really quite beautiful. And it's the imperfections, you know, that make it special. And yeah. Okay. I can, no, honestly, I could sit. Would it be better if I sat? Yeah, you know what? Why don't I'll use this. Okay. All right, great. Sorry. Thank you. Does this work? Is that better? Okay, all right, great. So you can see we found PCBs in the flooring, lead paint, asbestos. Obviously, we remediated it properly. And I had one resident tell me they felt like they were living in an HGTV show when they moved in. It was really wonderful. It was someone who actually was unhoused. So they moved from the shelter system into what they felt was like an HGTV show. Those are the things to me, that are invaluable, that stay with me forever, right? And the reason why I asked my ex-wife to bring the children today is because, that's what's important to me, is part of my legacy. This is very much my legacy, and I want them to see what I do, and hopefully they can emulate that in their own way. I'm going to go through. Here are just some other pictures. It was also a really interesting fact here was the Stalin Dean Company they sold baseball gloves and sporting equipment, and actually it's rumored that the catcher's mitt was invented in this building, which is really interesting. If anybody wants to ever take tours, William's here to give tours. But we have a great historical chronology in the building. Okay, this is in Cambridge. It was a vacant site, really long, complicated history here, where this land was intended to be donated to the community, and we ended up building 20, and I should have said, by the way, Station Lofts was 25 apartments, 14 of which were affordable. The city of Brockton at the time really wanted mixed income housing. David was involved in that project, and 100% affordable was something that the mayor at the time wouldn't get behind. But we were able to preserve 14 of the 25 in perpetuity, and they were mostly for families. So Port Landing, 20 apartments. This is right on the edge of Kendall Square. It's in the Port neighborhood. And this land was originally allocated to the community in a very contentious process. My partner Sharon and I ended up getting control of this, and we built 20 apartments for families. Again, 100% affordable in perpetuity. And Luke mentioned sustainability. Sustainability is incredibly important to us. This was 2016. Passive House, many of you probably heard of Passive House, didn't exist at the time. So LEED was the standard, and this became a LEED Gold building. This, and I'm not happy about this, this has 16 parking spaces underground, a giant waste of money, and something that we would never do now, but was required back 9 years ago. So, and here you can see the inside. We found an old map of Cambridge from the mid-1800s. And then you can see the finishes and the quality of the finishes. And this lady lived in the Port neighborhood, and we were able to get pictures of folks who lived in the neighborhood, and we put them up in the hallway and really tried to honor the community that way. So this is Frost Terrace. This was like Port Landing 2.0. So if you drive through Mass Ave, through Porter Square, you would see this project. It's just south, just before you get into Porter Square, coming from Harvard Square. This was a very complicated project. It's 100% affordable. The city of Cambridge really made this possible. They gave the project over $10 million, which is the only way that we could have accomplished a number of different things. Saving 3 historic buildings, saving trees, sort of honoring the streetscape of Mass Ave. A lot of things that we did here were very, very expensive, and the city was committed, because of this location especially, being on Mass Ave and being so prominent, the city was very committed. And you can see it was an abandoned house, and then there were 2 houses behind it. And I have and this project was 2021, 3 parking spaces on site, all of which were handicap only. And what I think is interesting is this was sort of revolutionary for Cambridge at the time, and if you know what Cambridge did subsequent to that, they said that parking wouldn't be required at all for future multifamily development, and that includes affordable and market rate. And I think this helped spur that, which I personally think was a good thing. So we ended up moving a house, and here's a video of it. So on the first day, we moved it forward, and then on the second day, we moved it sideways. What was very interesting about this project, too, was the church next door, which is part of Lesley University, had also been moved 1 lot over. And by doing this, we actually brought the church and the house back into historical alignment, which I thought was really interesting. And I probably should have included a picture of it. And here's the opening. And I know there's a lot of talk about trees, and there's not often a lot of right or wrong answers here. But from my perspective, we do our best to save trees, and we do our best to save open space. We had a neighbor here. We had a horse chestnut tree on one side of the parcel, and she said that she would chain herself to the tree if we tried to take it down. So we didn't take it down. We built the building around it. But the more impressive tree is this oak tree that you see. It's one of the largest oak trees in Cambridge. And we were able to save that. And that was something we were really proud of. And these are 2 houses behind a 5-story building. I should mention, with this project, we did end up building a basement. The neighbors didn't want us to go above 4/5 stories. It was very expensive, and we could have provided a number more apartments if we had not been required to go down, and we had been allowed to go up a little bit more. And if you do look at this project from across Mass Ave, I think most people would say it could have gone up a little bit higher, and no one would have been harmed. This is the McElwain School. This is the most recent one. This is a vacant school. And vacant schools provide a huge opportunity for building affordable housing. Councilor Farrell came to visit, which I appreciated. This was 3 buildings. We ended up building 57 apartments, mostly for families. 51 are affordable in perpetuity. And what was exciting here is this is our first passive house project. For those of you who are not familiar with passive house, it's probably the highest level of energy sustainability out there. It's about building really, really tight building envelopes. Whereas LEED is more holistic, looking at access to transportation and bikes and things like that. When you build a passive house building, you are building a building that leaks basically no air. It's pretty amazing. So what that means is utility costs are incredibly low for residents, both in the winter and in the summer. And you can see what we did afterwards. And a story here was, I had, you receive emails probably all the time with solicitations. And so a steampunk artist reached out to me. And very rarely have I ever looked at these emails. And I just clicked on it, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting stuff. I didn't know a whole lot about steampunk art. And other developers have redeveloped schools, and they've done a really fantastic job. And then I turned to Matt, and I said, how can we differentiate this project? Maybe we should put a steampunk sculpture out front. And it's been really great. It's a flying shoe. So the background is Bridgewater, just like Brockton and Haverhill, was a shoe capital of the country, right? And Mr. McElwain, his family donated the land for the school. And so he was a shoe baron, and he had the $2 shoe. So the steampunk artist thought, well, we can make a shoe. And then we had heard really great, fantastic stories about the school and what transpired in the school and the wonderful education that the kids got. And how creativity was being promoted. So he thought a flying shoe would be interesting. And it has spurred this really fascinating discussion across Bridgewater. Some people love it, some people don't like it, but everybody finds it interesting. And so my point here is, you know, this is more than just about housing. This is about how do we really build community? How do we involve people who might not necessarily live in the apartment, but they'll stop by and they'll look at it. And we have a plaque outside commemorating it. And so it's just something that we really enjoy doing, and we're willing to give up more of our fee to be able to do that. And then here's some, I'm gonna go on my knee. Before and after pictures that I think are really interesting. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later in the presentation. But the town put out an RFP, a request for proposals for the school. And they supported us in a lot of different ways. Through CPA funds, which is the Community Preservation Act, which Newton has. I think most of you, I see a lot of shaking heads, most of you are familiar with that. Those are funds that are matched by the state at varying levels depending on the year, and they have to be used for either open space, historic preservation, or affordable housing. This project encompassed all of those three, and I'll show you in a minute how. Historic preservation, restoring the old school, affordable housing is what I talked about. They also reduced their fees. Some of the building permit fees we pay on these projects are $400,000, $500,000, right? They're incredibly high. And they were willing to abate some of those fees. We use the comprehensive permit process, and I know a lot of people have a negative connotation toward that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. For these types of projects, it's very, very helpful at expediting them and moving them forward, even in towns that have surpassed their safe harbor. And then advocacy. And I'd say this is like one of the biggest, and here's, by the way, the after. You know, the town manager, members of the board of the select board, anytime they had an opportunity to talk to the lieutenant governor, to the state reps, or the state senator, they would constantly talk about this project. And from our perspective, that's what we need. We don't go into communities where we're going to have a fight. We're here to help implement your vision. And I'd say that's not just myself and my company, but that's a lot of the folks that are involved in affordable housing, whether it be our nonprofit partners or our for-profit partners. And so, you know, if a city or town has a old school that they'd like to see be converted to affordable housing, we're happy to help you realize your vision. But we don't have the energy or the time to fight. And so Bridgewater was great at advocating for us, which was really helpful in this project. I'm going to talk about AMIs and all that stuff shortly, but here's just some other information. I mean, you can see the transformation, right? It's like the building went to sleep, and then we were able to awaken it. And here's just another before and after. We kept the old chalkboards, which people love. Adults and children love it. They're in the bedrooms, they write notes to each other. It's pretty fantastic. And then the other components of the project, we were able to buy a Greek Revival house next door and maintain 3 units there. It allowed us to get some additional parking. Bridgewater is not necessarily Cambridge or Newton. And then we were able to build this 3-story passive house building at the rear. But all the details, you know, design is really important. And we built a public playground, a nature-themed playground, so you can see the trees. The site has a lot of trees, many of which are quite mature, and we were able to maintain them and also integrate them into the playground. There's a community room that community groups are allowed to use. We actually bought 60 chairs and we put them in a closet. So if like the garden club, or I believe there's another club that wants to come and hold their meetings, they can do so for free. And then we provide a fitness center to our residents. So that was the fun part of the presentation. Oh no, this is, okay. So let's take a step back for a second and talk about affordable housing. And what is affordable housing? And I'm giving you the technical definitions, okay? I'm not saying I agree with these or disagree with them. And in some cases, I actually do disagree with them. But these are the technical sort of definitions that in our industry. So we talk about the area median income. So we look at typically 80% or less of the area median income, and I'll explain that in 1 second, starts kind of affordability. And what's happened though is you've probably heard middle income housing, like 100% of the area median income or 120% of the area median income, because folks who make $150,000 a year have trouble affording an apartment at this point. But typically it's 80%. For the projects that I just showed you today, it's all 60%, 50%, and 30%. It's lower than 80%. And that's mostly driven because we use a subsidy called the low-income housing tax credit. And it has been responsible since 1986 for creating more affordable housing than any other program across the country. It's an amazing program. I could spend 3 hours up here talking about it. I will not do that tonight. But what it does is, in terms of calculating what is the area, right? So the area is, Newton is in this metropolitan statistical area, okay? And what you actually have to do is you have to overlay 2 maps on top of each other. One is the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy, Mass, New Hampshire MSA, which you see here. And then if you put Middlesex County on top of it, that's the area that they look at, okay? So it's basically Middlesex County in this purple area, right? And I'm sorry if I'm getting too technical, but it's pretty important. So you take a community like Brockton, which is part of other communities that have much higher income, it actually distorts the income in Brockton, right? So the 100%, if you looked at the median income in Brockton, right? 100%, you'd still qualify for 60% housing because the rents get driven up so much. It'd be by the adjacent communities that are part of this metropolitan statistical area. Okay, I'm just going to go through this. So, when is housing considered too expensive? So HUD says, and this is generally recognized, that 30% of one's adjusted gross income should be spent on rent and utilities. Any more than that, and you are cost burdened. And I know it probably seems like a low percentage. It used to be 25%. It was actually Senator Brooke, as part of the Fair Housing Act, passed this, and it was originally 25%, and now it's 30%. A lot of people are cost burdened right now, and housing is very, very expensive. I know I probably don't need to tell this group, but I pulled up a whole bunch of statistics, and I have all the references in here. 42% of renters in Newton are cost burdened. The Newton Housing Authority has a 10-plus year wait list for housing choice vouchers, which is a family program. And I just got on a website and I was able to pull down the median. If we remember back to like math class, the median is the middle, right? Not the average, which is the median salary in 2023 for City Newton employees was $75,000 and $66,000 for Newton public school employees. The average Newton 2-bed is $3,000 and 3-bed is $4,300. I pulled that off MLS, recent MLS numbers. So the point, though, is a 2-bedroom household, in order to not be rent burdened, would have to make almost $130,000 a year to afford a 2-bedroom in Newton. A 3-bedroom, you'd have to pay $180,000. You'd have to earn $180,000 a year. A 3-bedroom apartment. So we have a big problem, and we all know that. And folks just can't afford to live here. I'm not going to run through. There's a lot of numbers on this page. I know Josh is going to post the presentation, so you can come back here and compare the different income ranges that I was talking about earlier to, this is sort of what HUD considers affordable, and it still is relatively high. 60% for a 2-bed, this includes utilities, is $2,200. A lot of people can't afford that. And so we need more and more vouchers to help people as well. So back in the 80s, late 80s and 90s, where the low-income housing tax credit program, where correlates to these rents, was really all you needed for a family to live in one of these developments. Now, because incomes have gone up so much in our region, that the rents have gone up so much too, even under this affordable program. So it's been a real issue. Mass Live actually wrote an article about it recently that I thought was very well done. Oh, wait, you didn't see that. Okay. So, question, McElwain School Apartments. By a show of hands, and if you've seen this presentation already, this slide before, don't raise your hand. How many sources of funding did we have? So 0 to 10. Who thinks 0 to 10? Sources of funds to finance the project. All right, 11 to 15. Different sources of funding. Okay, 16 to 20. All right. We had 19 sources of funding. Here you go, for 57 apartments. Whoops, there we go. 19 different sources. It's very complicated. To the state's credit, they have these sources of funding. But it makes developing affordable housing very, very complicated, unfortunately. And so unless you've been a practitioner in the industry for many years, it's hard for a market rate developer to come in and say, I'm going to build 57 units of housing, 51 of which are going to be affordable in perpetuity. It's very difficult to navigate. And then I would also say that we're mission oriented, whether we're for-profit or nonprofit. There's a lot of things, as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of benefits we receive that are non-monetary, that are important to us, where internal rate of return and multiples are really not part of our vocabulary in our business. Okay, so so how can we do this in Newton, if this is something that we're interested in doing? So zoning and design. I mentioned a friendly 40B. If you are not familiar, 40B stands for Massachusetts Chapter 40B. Chapter 40 are all the zoning regulations in Massachusetts. 40B is kind of one-stop shopping. So you can go to the zoning board and get all of your local permits, whether that be a curb cut permit or a health permit or zoning permits. It encompasses it all. The standard, though, typically is cities and towns that have not met what is called 10% of their housing stock being affordable, or 1.5% of their land area including affordable housing, then they're subject to a comprehensive permit, a developer coming in and applying for this. Newton is above their 10%. We are above our 10%, so we are no longer subject to, we have what's called a safe harbor, right? So a developer, technically, who wanted to come in, could get denied by the zoning board, and they would have to find another way to get their project permitted. In Cambridge, before a recent overlay was passed, this is how we would permit projects. We're permitting a project right now in Springfield that has surpassed their 10%, and we're doing it as a 40B. It really is the easiest approach. If we want to build this in a timely manner, a 40B really is the way to do it. And we call it friendly because, again, it's something we think the community wants. The next is something I've actually been thinking about a lot over the last few months as I drive around in design standards. So design, in my mind, really matters. I've seen some really well-designed projects, and I have to say I've seen some pretty horribly designed projects in this community. And I say to myself, well, would I rather live next to a 7-story, beautifully designed building that really adds character and flavor to the neighborhood, or would I rather live next to a 4-story building, 3 stories less than the 7-story building, that's poorly designed? And I personally would rather live next to the well-designed building. I think there's probably been a number of developers who've done a disservice to the industry by designing sort of a low-quality product. I personally don't think we should settle for that in the name of housing. I think we should try to, there has to be compromises, but I think we should try to insist on good design. And good design doesn't necessarily have to cost more. It just requires a thoughtful architect and a thoughtful design team and working with the community. And so all the things that I list below, parking, traffic, trees, open space, historic considerations, schools, you know, compromise has to happen if we want this. We can't have everything, right? You know, what gave at Frost Terrace was the neighbors all wanted us to have parking because they all wanted to maintain their on-street parking space in front of their buildings, right? But something had to give. And at the end of the day, I think the city realized that and the neighbors realized that. And life has gone on, and people still park their cars on the street. They might have to walk an extra block or so. That's their new normal now. Funding is really important. So in order to receive state funding, we need to leverage our local funding. And Newton has a bunch of local funding. So the Affordable Housing Trust, which is fantastic and was recently created in the last 2 years, and Anne is the chairperson. Couldn't have a better chairperson, by the way. We have an allocation of funds through HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, called Home and CDBG. We think we'll have that continuing. We'll have to see. And then the other thing is what I mentioned earlier, local fee reductions. I'll give you an example. When we were under construction on Frost Terrace, if you recall, a few cities and towns during COVID shut down construction. Most said it was an essential service and we had to keep building housing. Cambridge was one of the communities that shut down construction. Well, they charged us $15,000 to maintain our parking spaces on Mass Ave during COVID, right? It's like, those are the types of things that really impact our projects. And we have to realize, and don't get me wrong, Cambridge has been incredibly generous with us. But at the same time, you know, building these fees add up. Sewer connection permit fees are $3,000 a unit, $4,000 a unit, $5,000 a unit in most communities. You have a 50-unit project, that's $250,000 just to connect to water and sewer, right? Building permits are $300,000, $400,000. These fees add up. And so those are ways that cities and towns, even that don't have funding like we do in Newton, can help contribute. And that's a requirement from the state. And then also infrastructure improvements, the MassWorks program, you can Google it after this, provides a lot of support to communities. So you cannot get state funding without a local commitment. It is an end of story. So publicly owned property and public-private partnerships. So McElwain School was a publicly owned school. Things like, and this has been floated around a lot, I've seen on the blogs, vacant schools, parking lots. Those are all great opportunities for development. But again, we have local businesses that, you know, might groan about the loss of parking, and I can sympathize with that. So it's how do we balance it all? Working with our state and federal partners, Congressman Auchincloss, he mentioned that he was a co-sponsor of 2 bills, one of which is incredibly important to the industry, that will support the low-income housing tax credit. And what's great is I know we're all, many of us are wondering what's going to happen in the future. But the good thing is the low-income housing tax credit is very well supported on a bipartisan basis. In the last Congress, there were 267 co-sponsors of our bill, and Darren LaHood, who's a Republican, was the lead sponsor. So there are signs of hope in some scary times right now. And then we have a lot of quasi-public agencies. David Rockwell worked at MHP, which is a quasi-public agency, Mass Housing, Mass Development. We're very lucky in Massachusetts. We have the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. We have our first housing secretary since I think the Romney administration, right? Which is really exciting. So, you know, housing is a huge focus. Housing is a huge focus of the Healy administration. Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, I've never seen a lieutenant governor so involved in housing. She's absolutely fantastic. We have the legislative delegation. You know, so we have a lot of state and federal partners, and then all the local partners, the city council, right? The planning department, neighbors, community groups, right? And then nonprofit investors and partners. So in Massachusetts, we're really well supported by groups like the Mass Housing Investment Coalition. They provide tax credit funding. They provide money, pre-development money, meaning before you start these projects, They help fund costs like architecture and payments to land sellers. We have the Life Initiative and the Property and Casualty Initiative will do the same thing. They'll loan us millions of dollars for these things before we even have a project permitted. And so we're very, very lucky in Massachusetts. Let's see. Last thing is public messaging, and this is something I wanted to talk about. And I think we need to get the word out that if we do want this in Newton, that we're going to support this work, and that we do have affordable housing trust funding, and that we want to see this type of development. We want to work with developers on this. Little cities and towns like Bridgewater, like Templeton. We're doing this project in Templeton with 8,000 people, right? And the select board chair is literally out there all the time, anytime he can, saying, what else do you need? What can I do to make this happen, right? Like, seniors in our town don't want to have a single family house anymore, and they can't afford, we don't have any rental housing. What do? We need this project. So, some additional thoughts. So, I just wanted to talk about a few complexities with this type of development. It takes a huge amount of capital up front, and as I mentioned, some of these quasi-public agencies lend us money. It's the only way that we could do this. We have to put up significant guarantees during construction and to our tax credit investors. So everybody thinks, oh, the state's giving you all this money. Great, it sounds like a great business. There's a reason why people aren't lining up to do this type of work, because it's really, really high risk. And from a pure financial standpoint, the reward isn't great, okay? When you add it up collectively, the non-monetary benefits that we receive, then it's worth it to us. But we have to, imagine saying, okay, I'm going to put up all my net worth, all of Matt's net worth. My partner, Sean, he walked in the room. He's in the back. He's my partner in Cambridge, too. For a fixed fee at the end of the day. It's pretty scary. So you really have to believe in your team. And you're really into these projects, like $2 million before you close on the construction and start. And you do get that money back when you get to that point. We've been working on Templeton for 5 years, right? And then there's like the opportunity cost of time, right? So if Sean and I spent 2 years permitting a project in Cambridge, just north of Porter Square. We literally spent 2 years of our life, and we got shot down by the zoning board. And we got nothing. We're back. We're back and better. But, we've owned that project now for 4 or 5 years. All these bullet points are a little bit random, but are sort of not cohesive. But scale has come up too. Someone mentioned, why don't we just build a 10-unit project, right? Well, we always say a 10-unit project takes the same amount of work and same amount of time as a 100-unit project. And we all have to work for a living, right? Like, I'm not going to, I have to support my family. We work really hard, and we deserve to be compensated for our time. And a 10-unit project can't get us there. The amount of the years that we put into these projects and the amount of risks that we put forward just do not compensate us for that. So projects, I would say 40 units or below really are not feasible in our business. Everything we're doing right now is 40, 50, 60 apartments. And then I do want to mention, so the program, the LIHTC is Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. What's really great about this program, and it was a bipartisan effort, it was part of the 1986 Tax Reform Act, was that, and Luke had mentioned this earlier, no one was really responsible for affordable housing upkeep, tenant certifications, things like that, where a lot of the stereotypes of affordable housing have come from pre-1986. The idea was, how do we involve private developers who are on the hook personally for the upkeep of these properties, for ensuring that the residents qualify on an income basis, so you're not putting in people that don't qualify. And they came up with this program where you get these tax credits, and if you don't comply, then the government takes back the tax credits, and we have to write checks. So it's a really great incentive, though, to ensure that these buildings are well maintained, are built well, we have to own them for at least 15 years. That's a requirement. So if you think about it, when you're making a decision about, well, should I put on the better roof or the not so great roof? Because if you're going to be around for 15 years, you're going to put on the better roof, right? You're going to put in the better windows. It was kind of a genius program, the way they developed it. And so we're long-term owners. We're going to be owners. And even though we have to own for 15 years, typically you end up owning in perpetuity. So you really become a part of the community. You are really heavily invested in the infrastructure, and it's a great program. And then we do hear a lot, we're hearing a lot right now in Cambridge in a project that 4 of us are working on right now, is, well, nonprofit developers should be doing all of this work. And hopefully, I've shown you that I'm a for-profit developer, but I think, equally as committed as a nonprofit developer. We all do great work. Anne was the head of a nonprofit developer in Chelsea that did fantastic work and continues to do fantastic work. I think we all have a lot of respect for each other. We partner with each other. We all bring a lot of value to the table. In the private world, we can bring some additional financial resources that nonprofits may not have. We're partnering with a local nonprofit that wants senior housing in an abandoned school in Springfield right now, and they wouldn't be able to do it on their own. So, to blanketly say, well, all affordable housing has to be built by nonprofits, I just don't. I think we've proven that it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And also, I just want to mention that our developer fee and overhead is capped. Whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, it's all the same. It's exactly the same. So we all make the same amount. And this stat I got, which is 40% of subsidized units in Massachusetts are developed by for-profit developers, just so everybody knows. Okay, a few additional thoughts. I know we're running out of time. I'm just going to run through this very quickly. Public benefits. A lot of these vacant buildings cause huge liabilities for cities and towns. They have environmental costs. People break into them. There's a lot of arson risk, huge liability, lots of carrying costs. It raises the city or your town's insurance premiums. And there's a lot of really great economic benefits too. So a school is not on the tax rolls. When we buy it, it gets put on the tax rolls and we pay taxes. Some of our residents, depends where you are, have cars. They pay excise taxes. We create, on a 55-unit project, we'll create 55 construction jobs for 2 years. We'll create 3 or 4 permanent jobs. We will pay permits and fees. We will have residents who are only paying 30% of their income on rent, which means they have disposable income that they can spend at local businesses. And a lot of businesses around here only serve 4 days a week because they can't find enough people to work. Well, now you're moving residents into the area that can fill these jobs. And then historic repurposing and saving all the buildings that we love. And I just put the Armory picture up there as an example. Second to last, sorry, Luke. Here's some policy that's happening. And I'm sure the representative can talk more about this, but I just wanted to mention a few things. I mentioned the first one already. There's a lot of big things coming up in Congress right now that's going to impact funding for housing. The debt ceiling expires in July. In order to keep the government open, there needs to be another continuing resolution in 2025 in March. And there's going to be a reconciliation, and clearly Trump has indicated that there's going to be a massive tax bill, or at least an extension of the tax cuts from his last administration that are expiring. So we have to pay for those cuts somehow. And I think a lot of us are very concerned that housing will also be on the chopping block. That being said, the Republicans and the Trump administration have indicated that housing is a huge priority of theirs. So I think there will be a focus on housing, increasing housing supply, and some deregulation, some of which may be good, some of which may not be good. Project 2025, which I'm sure most of you have heard about, and if you read the chapter on HUD, some of the things you may agree with, but other things are very scary, especially around fair housing. There's something called affirmatively furthering fair housing. The Trump administration got rid of that and last time, and they're most likely going to get rid of it again. So I think fair housing issues are going to be a huge, huge concern. Luckily, we're in Massachusetts, and we have a really strong legislature that supports fair housing and governor that supports fair housing. So those are kind of the things that are impacting our business on the federal side. On the state side, you probably have all heard about the housing bond bill, which is the largest piece of housing legislation ever passed in the Commonwealth. It's very exciting. There's a lot of funding associated with it, as well as a lot of policy that's very, very good. And then the MBTA communities law, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So in closing, we talked about buildings, we've talked about amenities, we've talked about zoning, but like this is why it matters to me right here, okay? So on the left side of the screen is one of our residents at Station Lofts in Brockton, who was like one of the first to move in. She still lives there. And we found out her bed had collapsed. And so the property manager and myself, we just chipped in and bought her a new bed and bought her, a new bedspread, and she couldn't be happier. And she loves living there. She's bags groceries at Stop and Shop, right? On the right side of the screen, you can see Sean in the picture with me. There is a nonprofit in Cambridge that does fantastic affordable housing work named Justice Start. Right before the holidays in 2017, 16, 17, something like that, there was a devastating fire, and everybody lost everything, kind of like what's similar to what's going on in LA, obviously not the same scale. And this family literally only had the clothes that you see them wearing in this picture. So we all banded together, the contractor, Sean, myself, and we raised $10,000. And Representative Decker, who represents the district there, took them shopping, and we were able to get them all new clothes and furniture, and we were able to support other families too. So while we're building, we were able to move them into this apartment that we had just opened, just down the street. And the great story is actually, at the end of the day, 3 years later, St. Stephen's, which had burned down, was rebuilt, and they moved back. That was great, but in the meantime, we were able to provide them with a really nice 3-bedroom apartment that they could live in. In the McElwain School, these buildings tell stories, and I always say that schools are one of the most, if not the most important buildings in a community. Most people have either attended the school, or their friends attended the school, or they've worked at the school, or their kids went to the school. And so we held an open house for just the community, and the outpouring of support and attendance was amazing. A lot of the people you see here either went to the school or worked at the school. We actually had the former principal's wife come by. He had passed, and she went into his office, which was a bedroom, and she got really emotional about it. And it was like, that building was at risk of being torn down, and now it's going to live on, and part of his legacy was going to live on. And I just added a picture of my kids, which is like really, in many ways, why I do this work. Sorry it was long. I probably went over by like a ton, but thanks.
So I'll walk around with this. You can answer the questions on that.
Yeah, sure.
All right. But yeah, thanks. Please thank Jason. That was great. We're going to now open up things for questions from the audience. We have a large group here, so please make sure you ask a question. I will take the mic if you don't ask one. And do try to keep those questions to about 30 seconds, and I will help you with that again if that's hard. And if you're on the Zoom, put your questions in the chat, and we will intersperse them with the questions live here. We'll do a couple minutes of questions here. So yeah, any thought? Oh, got one over there.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting presentation. So Massachusetts has all sorts of great stuff. Why do we have such a housing problem?
That's a good question. Yeah, sure.
Sorry, the question was Massachusetts has a lot of great stuff about it, but why do we have such a severe housing crisis?
Sure, I can give you my opinion based on both my work and also a lot of the reading that I do. It is absolutely a supply problem. It's basic microeconomics. We just don't have nearly enough supply. And honestly, I do think much of it comes down to zoning and our restrictive zoning. And the fact that it is, it is so hard to build housing here. It is incredibly difficult. The fact that we couldn't permit 48 apartments just north of Porter Square that was going to be a passive house building for 48 families, right, in perpetuity, affordable in perpetuity, next to, I would say arguably the most resource-centered area of the country, like that shows there's a problem, you know? Like we have to stop blocking housing. So, yeah.
Hi, thank you. I have about 40 questions, but I'll stick to one. Talk to us about how you handle neighbors when you start these projects and when they get word that there's going to be an affordable housing development next to them, because I know that that has been historically a problem.
Yeah, you want to repeat the question? Or, oh, okay. Oh, yeah, okay. So how do we handle neighbors? I think we try to be as respectful as we can. I think we try not to have preconceived notions about why someone might either, in most of the cases, a lot of the cases, oppose a project. And we try to believe that everybody has good intentions. It's obviously not always the case. We do, absolutely, we meet with them. Yeah, so we've been in lots of living rooms. We've been in lots of community centers, lots of senior centers. Yeah, I think it's definitely listening. We try to do a visioning session first, where we don't actually put up images. You know, we'll try to, internally, we'll obviously have some concepts, but like we're doing this project on Mass Ave again that we've brought back, and we had done some internal sketches, and then we had a community meeting that was just a visioning community meeting, and we're changing a bunch of what we already did based on community feedback. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to agree with everything. If someone says, well, your 12-story building should be 3 stories, you know, you're pretty far apart at that point, right? But yeah, it can be challenging. There was a really great article in the New York Times a number of years ago. It said something like, when did not in my backyard become not in my neighborhood? And it goes through a little bit of the history of zoning and how zoning was to protect you originally from like a real nuisance next door, like environmental hazard or noise, right? And how it's become this thing where like that project way down the street, you know, I don't like it, so I'm gonna try to block it, right? I don't quite have the name of the article right, but I think it's a really great article and it talks about that, so.
I get to read the questions coming in from the Zoom. We have somebody asking if you've been able to house people with disabilities who are very low income, living on government-provided income like Social Security, SSI,
that's a great question. I should have addressed that in the presentation. Yeah, so the Commonwealth actually has some really great programs. One is called community-based housing. Another is called AAHG. We have a lot of acronyms in our business. But yes, the Commonwealth provides support for both capital subsidies, meaning subsidies we use to build a building, as well as to support folks on a fixed income who need rent assistance as well. So we do. We actually, so the building code requires 5% of your apartments be fully accessible. We usually take that further, and we'll have a unit, every single unit type will have at least one accessible apartment. So if you have, you know, 5 different unit types and you only needed to build 3 accessible apartments, we'll have 5 accessible apartments. All of our other apartments are what we call visitable, meaning someone in a wheelchair can access those. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'm one of those people who a year or more ago said, well, why don't we get more nonprofit developers to come in? And someone said to me, you need to meet Jason Korb. And I did, and I've had the great pleasure to meet with him a couple of times and to go out and see some of his work, and it's extraordinary. I do have a question that's coming up, but one of the things I want to say is that I'm really happy to see some of the people who are actually working on the laws and ordinances in the city who are here listening. And one of the people I'd like to note is Mark Laredo, who's the current president of the Newton City Council. And from my perspective, I'm really pleased to say he's going to be running for mayor of Newton. And I'm really pleased to see him here and listen to these ideas. Always pleasure to see Amy Sangiolo. We have another city councilor, Randy Black, back here. And the only reason I do this is because we are the people, we are really concerned about this. Low-income, affordable housing in the city. And we want you to know that we are thinking about it a lot. And my question, Jason, is how do we get you to add Newton to your list?
I appreciate it. I have a lot of respect for Councilor Farrell, and we've spent a lot of time together. I think I'm best suited right now to be a citizen, helping to find folks that can contribute and make sure that, hopefully people are doing the right thing. And that, because we're very committed. My fiance and I are very committed to living here. We'd like to buy a house. we rent too. It's not so easy, even for us, right? And which says a lot. So I think right now, I very much appreciate, I'm honored and appreciate it. For now, I'd like to be an advocate. But thank you.
Could you give more examples of partnerships between nonprofit and for-profit developers? Is that a path to giving more options to develop more units?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. There's numerous examples. I think the West Newton Armory is an example between Civico and Metro West CDC right here in our town, and I think that's the first low-income housing tax credit family project we've ever had. I don't know. Yes, Henry's shaking his head. So yes, which is pretty amazing. We've had a number of senior projects and elderly and disabled, but to have so that's an example. Beacon, my old company, just finished a project in Beverly with Harbor Light. So we're doing a project in Springfield. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits to bringing in a nonprofit. I would say, I'm seeing my friend Josephine here. I didn't talk much about services and things that are very near and dear to her heart, which are really important. And nonprofits bring a lot of that experience. One of the things I wish we could do more of, or wish we do more of, and we should, is focus more on services for individuals and how can we empower them from an economic standpoint, a job standpoint. It's really something I think we need to focus on, and nonprofits bring great experience with that, so as well. And also serving lower income individuals and households. Because as I said, the low-income housing tax credit program really doesn't serve the folks I think it originally served, which is unfortunate. So, but to that, sorry, David, to that point though, the state has done a really great job of increasing the amount of housing vouchers which help people pay their rent. So, other questions?
Thanks, Jason. I'm really glad that you made the point that there really shouldn't be a difference between the for-profit developer and the nonprofit developer. And I'm glad that Councilor Farrell, through his getting to know you and your company and your work, now understands that. All too often, people who are running for council in Newton and some people who are on the council continue to advocate for development to be only by nonprofit developers. And I hope for everyone who's here tonight that if we hear anyone saying that, we will quote Jason, and we will refer to the provision in, I believe it's chapter 40B, that caps the profit that the developer can make. And as Jason said, it's capped at the same level, no matter whether the developer is for-profit or not for-profit. So thank you very much.
Please do ask a question. You gonna ask a question? All right.
To what extent does the development of market-based housing influence your business, crowd you out? What's the impact, or what kind of competition exists there and hurts the development of more affordable housing?
That's an excellent question. I would say 5 years ago, we were constantly being beat out by market rate developers that could buy a site and close in 60 days, right? They had tons of institutional capital behind them. They were willing to take development risk. We don't see that anymore. With the rise in interest rates, a lot of people have permitted multifamily housing that they're looking to sell. They can't financially make it work. So as you see what's happening, you probably read in the papers, you can even just see it around town. Market rate housing has basically come to a standstill at this point. So we're really well positioned. We don't see market rate developers as competition as we did before. But previously, and if interest rates fall again, and at some point market rate housing will become quite viable, it's very difficult to compete. And that's where Cambridge, for example, puts up a significant amount of funding for acquisition. So we just purchased, and it's public, we purchased an $18.3 million 1+ acre parcel of land behind Frost Terrace, and we're gonna build Frost Terrace 2. We don't know how many units it's gonna be yet, but we would never have been able to buy that parcel. It was marketed by Cushman & Wakefield. They received a number of different offers. We would have been beat out by a market rate developer in that case. So in the Cambridge market, and possibly in the Newton market, there is still some competition, but it's not as steep as it was before. So, yeah.
Maybe a related question. What are the big levers that could be pulled to reduce your cost of construction and thereby make more affordable projects possible, make them work financially? And maybe I'll add on my question to this, because this is an audience of people who I think are interested in seeing more of that. What are things specifically that we here in Newton should be looking to do to help, maybe not you, but your colleagues develop more affordable projects?
Sure. That's a good question. I think one of the things that we constantly, at least certainly growing up in Newton, you're going to college, Jason, right? And I didn't really consider the fact that like a trade school would have been possible. So I don't know if any of you who own houses have tried to call an electrician or plumber lately. It's not so easy, right? We really haven't done a great job of promoting construction trades. We tell our children, both children, like if you want to become an electrician or a plumber, great, because we don't have enough. So I think any way that we can promote the trades. Also, density is helpful, right? So if you're buying a parcel of land for $1 million and you can only put 5 units on it, right? That's $200,000 a unit in acquisition cost. If you can put 20 units on it, it's $50,000, right? And so being able to build more density on a parcel of land is very, very helpful. The city of Cambridge has done a fantastic job with that. They passed what's called the Affordable Housing Overlay, which has huge density bonuses for 100% affordable housing projects. It's really innovative, so.
Thank you, Jason. This is great. One of the tools you talked about is publicly owned sites. And in Newton, we're about to start cataloging them more concretely, but a lot of them are small. Mm-hmm. And my question for you is, how much of a problem is it for you to contemplate doing scattered site projects so that you could put a number of these parcels together that might be somewhat near each other? Are you interested in that kind of a development opportunity as a developer?
Yeah, good question. So scattered site is multiple small sites within a relatively similar geographic area done as a single project. We've never done it. To me, it's somewhat complicated because you're building now 7 foundations, 7 roofs, 7, versus 1. Nonprofits have done, as you know, a lot of that type of work. I think as a private developer, and I'd be interested to hear like Metro West answer that as well, I think it's challenging. I think a single site where you can support 40, 50, 60 units of 100% affordable low-income housing, tax credit housing is really the cleanest way and the fastest way to get it done. But I never want to say no, so that's my own perspective, though.
All right, well, thanks again, Jason. That's all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank you one more time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Feel free to reach out over email.
Yeah. So we'll leave it there. We really appreciate Jason coming. We also want to thank Dennis Milligan for helping with all the audio-visual stuff. If you enjoyed this event and would like to hear more about events like this or to help us grow the supply of housing in Newton, please sign up for our newsletter. There's QR codes and there's a list on the door. You can point your phone at this thing if you're into phone pointing as well. That's perfectly fine. We'll have some more events in spring of 2025 about the connection between housing and the environment, workforce housing, and how market rate housing can contribute to affordability. And lastly, we have a request to make of all of you. If you're a supporter of affordable housing, if you weren't, thanks for coming, and hopefully now you are. But please reach out to the City Council and tell them that you want to take action on some of these recommendations that Jason's giving us tonight and support more affordable housing in our community. We'll be sending you an email tomorrow with a tool to help you do that. And yeah, that's all. Thank you, everyone, and good night.